So for JavaScript to know when we've clicked this, we need to add an on-click listener. Now there are several ways to add a listener, but let's do it the easy way. Then we're going to do it the hard way for the thumbnails down here. So let's begin with the easy way first. So what I will do is go to the I think I'll put this on the slider left and on the slider right instead of on the click itself. So maybe what we should do, just a little bit here, I'll put some styles here and cursor pointer. Okay, so that way the whole thing is a pointer on this side and on the other side, so that's fine. Then I can just remove on this one, as I will not need it on the icon itself. And then right on the left and on the right here, I will put an on-click listener by just typing on-click. On-click like that. And we're going to use one function. It's just going to be called move. Now you can name this function anything you want. Now we're not going to be supplying an event as usual, but the information we need is very little here. We just need to know whether somebody has clicked the left side or the right side. So this is the left side and this is the right side. So we're just going to send some text left and right. So we now need to create a function called move at the bottom here. So script tags for our JavaScript, and then let's create a function, say function move like that, and then we'll get the direction, we'll call it direction, and like that. And then what I want it to do is just to alert me as to which direction I actually clicked, just like that. And let's refresh the page and click away. So this is the right side and this is the left side, so things are working fine. Now the thing is, we can add functions here for every activity that we do. So the move, and there will be other functions to do other things. Now the problem comes in JavaScript. So I'm going to digress here a little bit and give you a bit of tips on the JavaScript. So with JavaScript, you can have, normally in other programming languages, when you put two functions with the same exact name, you get an error, but not with JavaScript. So if, for example, I can have two of these like so, and it's going to work just fine. So if I refresh and click, it will just work and not complain. But what's happening is that it's actually only activating the last version of this. So if, for example, I put some text in here, just some random text, you see that this one will never get called. The one which has left or right, it's just going to be 2 every time. So if I click 2, click 2, that's what happens. So what will happen is this: if you, let's say you create several or a bunch of functions in here, and then later on you add this project to an existing project, right, where you used exactly the same names for functions, you're not going to even know that other functions have stopped running because they are colliding with other functions. And a problem with JavaScript is that you cannot, unlike PHP where you can create classes to hide certain functions inside classes, you cannot do that in JavaScript. Well, technically you can, because it's been upgraded, but we are not at that level yet. We want to do it the old-fashioned way. So how do we get rid of this situation here? Well, there's a solution. Now the thing is, in JavaScript, inside a function like this one, I can actually create another function in here, and this is very valid. I can create another function in here and another function inside that function, which is not a problem. And then another feature of JavaScript is that I don't need to declare a function like this. I can declare a function by saying var me is equal to function, like so. And this is a valid function. So if I call this, it's going to run this function. So let me just say alert me so that we see when this actually runs. So if I just run this, I won't see anything at this point unless I call this. So I can call this by just calling it like a normal function like this. And it's very valid. As you can see, it has run there. Okay. So there are many ways of doing things in JavaScript. So now, if you notice very well here, this is calling the function and this is declaring the function, right? Now, there's a way in JavaScript to also declare an anonymous function, because as you can see here, this function has no name per se here, because normally you say function and then you put the name, but this is an anonymous function, no name. It's just that we attached it to this variable so that we can call it at a very specific time. However, there's a way you can activate a function. For example, here, if I do this, if I say something like function, let's see what happens to this. Okay, so at this point, let's see, function statement requires a name. Okay, so there's a way to create a function. Now, the reason, let me explain a little bit here about scope. So if I declare a variable in here, I say var a is equal to something like this. Okay, so once I declare this variable here, its scope is within the function. So outside the function here, this a does not exist, so it's only in here. So we can use the same technique to hide some other functions. So if I get this function and put it in here, just like this variable there, this function, the scope of this function is within this function. So I cannot call this function from outside this other function. So it can see all these variables in here normally, but nothing outside. So this is a good way to isolate your code. So let's try and do it that way. So for example, we're going to put a function. We'll put all our functions inside the main function that will run automatically, because we don't want to have to call the function, but you can do it that way if you want. But I want it to be an anonymous function, so I'm going to do this function like this and open and closing curly brackets like that. Oh, the brackets are there. So function, those brackets, and then these brackets. So this is very familiar, this part here, because this is exactly this, only that this is an anonymous function. It doesn't have a name like that. But you can do a funnier thing in JavaScript, is that you can do this as well, like that. So this looks a little bit complicated, but I'm declaring an anonymous function. Now, because it doesn't have a name, I can't really call it. So these brackets here are meant to put it inside, so that because if I leave it outside these brackets, it will tell me that this function requires a name. But if I put it like this, I make it an anonymous function inside these brackets. And then these brackets here are for adding variables like this here. And then these curly brackets are for putting code, just like these. This one is closing that. But then these two are for calling the function. So I'm declaring the function here and immediately calling it. So let me show you how this works. If I were to do this here, I would tell it to alert me and say, just say function, something like this. So let's try this out and refresh, and you see it's running function. But if I remove these two, it will not run because I'm not calling it, I'm just declaring it there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So since we want to be able to use global variables in here, so inside I will supply some variables here like window. Oh, sorry. Now I don't need to do this because window is a global variable, so I can access it directly in here, but there's a possibility that I can set it to something else, so it's better I pass it by reference here so that whatever I set it to inside here doesn't affect the global window itself. So I'll do the same for document like that. Now this is equivalent to calling a function, so I'm supplying these things here, which means when receiving the function itself should have these variables as well, so I'll put them in there like that. So it may look very confusing at first, but just do it this way and you will know that whatever code is in here is isolated. So I will get my function and put it in here like so. So it's a function within an anonymous function. Now the beauty of this is that if I try to read this function from here, I will get an error. If I just try to call it from outside here, let me just say something like hello and refresh. You see that reference move is not defined. So the advantage of this is that I can create another function down here named move, and it will not affect this function in here. So this means I can get this code and put it on any project of mine and not have to worry about repeated function names. Okay,